They laughed too easily for a room that expensive. Polished glass, quiet air conditioning, tailored suits. Everything felt controlled. Predictable? She didn't react to the comment. Not even a glance up, just a slow stir of sugar, one soft clink against porcelain. Most people would have rushed to explain who she was. No one did. Because in that room, titles mattered more than faces. And hers apparently meant nothing. The chairman moved on as if nothing had happened. Slides changed. Numbers flowed. Voices layered over each other in confident, rehearsed tones. A $2.1 billion acquisition. Complex, aggressive, strategically inevitable. She listened. Quietly. Carefully. The kind of listening that doesn't interrupt. Just remembers. One executive leaned closer to another, whispering something with a smirk. Someone else checked their watch. The CFO kept scrolling, already 3 steps ahead in projections. And still, no one asked why her folder stayed closed. Because if they had, they might have noticed the signature line, or the fact that it was empty. The room was designed to impress people who were used to being impressed. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed a skyline that looked like a balance sheet. Clean lines, sharp edges, nothing accidental. The table stretched long enough to separate power from proximity. At one end sat the chairman, perfectly centered, like a signature at the bottom of a contract already decided. Around him, 20 executives. Different accents, identical confidence. And then there was her. She didn't belong to the rhythm of the room. No laptop open, no slides, no restless tapping of fingers against polished wood. Just a ceramic cup, a teaspoon, and that folder. Closed, aligned, untouched. The kind of stillness that usually meant irrelevance or control. The presentation moved forward with the smooth aggression of something rehearsed too many times to fail. Synergies are already modeled, one of the VPs said, clicking to the next slide. Integration risk is within acceptable thresholds. Numbers filled the screen. Growth curves arched upward like promises no one intended to question. Another voice joined in. We're looking at immediate market consolidation. Competitors won't have time to react. A few nods. A few quiet, exactly. No one asked the only question that mattered. Not yet. She lifted the cup, took a small sip, set it back down with surgical precision. The chairman didn't look at her again. He didn't need to. In his version of the room, she had already been categorized, filed, dismissed. Let's move to execution timeline, he said, steepling his fingers. I want 0 delays. We've invested too much to hesitate now. Too much. The words hung in the air, heavy with certainty. Across the table, the CFO scrolled through his tablet, verifying figures, cross-checking projections. Efficient, focused, detached. He paused for half a second longer than usual. Not enough to raise suspicion. Enough to plant a question. He frowned slightly, then smoothed it out. No one noticed, except her. The next slide appeared. Closing scheduled for today, the VP continued. Final authorization pending formal sign-off. There it was, buried in polished language, wrapped in confidence. Sign-off. A simple word. A critical absence. She didn't move. Not even a shift in posture, but something in the room, something microscopic, tilted. The kind of shift you don't feel immediately. Only later when everything starts to slide. One of the younger executives leaned forward. All documentation is ready, correct? Fully prepared, came the answer without hesitation. Another nod. Another layer of certainty. The chairman allowed himself a faint smile. Good. Then we proceed. Proceed. As if motion itself could replace verification. As if momentum was proof. She placed the spoon beside the cup. Perfect alignment. Parallel to the edge of the saucer. Still no one looked at the folder. The CFO tapped once on his screen. Then again. This time the pause lasted longer. His eyes narrowed, not dramatically, not enough to disrupt the flow, but enough to interrupt his own confidence. Just to confirm, he said, voice neutral, controlled. The signatory is present. A simple question. Too simple. The room didn't freeze. It didn't need to. The hesitation was quieter than that, subtle, almost polite. Yes, the VP replied immediately. All required parties have been accounted for. A clean answer. Too clean. The CFO didn't respond right away. His thumb hovered over the screen, then lowered slowly. He glanced up. Not at the chairman. Not at the slides. At her. For the first time, someone in that room actually saw her. No reaction met his gaze, no acknowledgement. Just calm, composed stillness. The kind that doesn't ask for attention. Because it doesn't need it. He looked back down at the tablet. Scrolled. Stopped. Scrolled back. Strange, he murmured almost to himself. What is it? The chairman asked, impatience wrapped in authority. The CFO inhaled slightly. Not uncertainty. Calibration. I'm reviewing the authorization chain, he said. There's a gap. A single word shifted the temperature of the room. Gap. The VP straightened. That's not possible. It's not visible, the CFO corrected quietly. Precision mattered. The chairman leaned forward. Clarify. The CFO turned the screen slightly, though no one was close enough to see clearly. The final signatory field, he said, slower now, each word placed carefully, is unconfirmed. Silence didn't fall. It assembled, piece by piece, across faces that were trained not to react too quickly. That must be a synchronization delay, someone offered. Yes, probably a system lag, another added quickly. Explanations rushed in to fill the space where certainty had just cracked. She reached for the folder. Not quickly, not dramatically, just finally. The soft sound of paper against leather cut through the layered voices more effectively than any interruption. Heads turned. Not all at once, but enough. The chairman's eyes followed the movement, irritation forming before recognition. Is there something you'd like to add? He asked, tone already dismissive. She opened the folder. Inside, documents, clean, structured, final. Her fingers rested lightly on the top page. No, she said calmly. I believe everything has already been said. Not defiance, not submission. Just fact. The CFO looked at her again, this time longer, trying to solve something that had just stopped behaving like a system. The chairman exhaled sharply. Then let's not derail this with technicalities. We proceed as planned. Technicalities. The word landed wrong, because somewhere between the projections and the assumptions, the foundation had quietly shifted. She closed the folder again, soft, final, and for the first time since the meeting began, the room felt slightly smaller, as if something essential had just stepped out of it, and no one except one was ready to admit it. Something wasn't just missing, it had already left. The word proceed should have pushed the room forward. Instead, it hesitated, not visibly, not enough to alarm anyone untrained. But in a room built on precision, even a fraction of a second without motion felt off, like a perfectly tuned machine skipping one invisible beat. The chairman didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. His authority relied on momentum, on the assumption that once a decision was voiced, reality would align around it. "Finalize the authorization," he said, tone clip now. "We're not delaying a $2.1 billion close over a display glitch." Display glitch. The CFO didn't respond immediately. He wasn't looking at the slides anymore. He was looking at the audit trail, lines of timestamps, approvals, digital confirmations stacked in clean vertical order, each one a signature of intent, each one a piece of accountability, until the last line, where the chain didn't end, it stopped. He zoomed in, cross-checked the source, pulled the back-end reference. Nothing. Not an error, not a delay, absence. "Rerun the validation," he said quietly, more to the system than to the room. "It's already validated," the VP replied, too quickly. "Legal cleared it last night." "Legal clears documents," the CFO said, still calm. "Not authority." A subtle distinction. A critical one. Across the table, someone shifted in their chair. Another adjusted their cufflinks, eyes flicking briefly toward the woman, then away again, as if acknowledging her presence might confirm something they weren't ready to process. The chairman's patience thinned by degrees. "We have full board alignment. We have legal clearance. We have capital secured. I'm not interested in theoretical gaps." The CFO finally looked up. "This isn't theoretical." A pause, measured, controlled, but heavier than before. "The authorization chain requires a final signatory to activate execution rights," he continued. "Without it, the acquisition cannot legally close." The room didn't react all at once, it fragmented. One executive opened his laptop, typing rapidly. Another leaned toward a colleague, whispering under their breath. Someone else refreshed their screen 3 times in a row, as if repetition could produce presence. And still, no signature. The chairman exhaled slowly, irritation hardening into something sharper. "Then identify the signatory and resolve it now. Simple, direct, late." The CFO didn't answer, because he already had. His gaze shifted again to her. This time it wasn't curiosity, it was alignment, a pattern completing itself. "You said all required parties were accounted for," he addressed the VP, voice neutral but cutting through the noise. "They are," the VP insisted. "Everyone's here. Everyone." The word echoed wrong, because for the first time the room began to understand the difference between presence and participation. She hadn't spoken since, hadn't interrupted, hadn't objected, hadn't signed. The CFO set the tablet down, deliberately. "You're looking at the wrong metric," he said quietly. The chairman's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The issue isn't whether the signatory is present," the CFO said. "It's whether the signatory has chosen to sign." A shift, clean, irreversible. Silence didn't fall this time. It locked. The kind of silence that doesn't wait for resolution, it demands it. All attention turned to her. Not gradually, immediately. 20 executives, one focal point. The woman who had been invisible 15 minutes ago now occupied the center of a problem no one had modeled. The chairman leaned back slightly, recalibrating. His tone changed, not softer, but more precise. "Madam," he said, measured now, "if there is a procedural step pending, I suggest we complete it." Suggest. A downgrade from command. She looked at him. Finally. Not with defiance, not with hesitation, with clarity. "There is no pending step," she said. The words were quiet. They carried anyway. Then why isn't the document executed? He pressed, the edge returning. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the folder again. This time, fully. Pages turned, not rushed, not theatrical. Just enough to expose structure, clauses, sign-off lines. The architecture of something that had been assumed, not verified. Her finger rested lightly on a section halfway down the page. Because, she said, execution requires acknowledgement of all conditional terms. The CFO leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Conditions. Another word the room hadn't accounted for. We've reviewed all terms. The VP cut in, defensive now. There are no outstanding conditions. She tilted her head slightly. Not disagreement, correction. There are, she said. A single sentence, a full collapse waiting behind it. The chairman's voice sharpened. Then state them. No hesitation. Clause 11.4, she said calmly. Continuity of operational oversight. A few executives glanced at each other. One of them opened a document, scrolling fast. Another whispered, "That's standard." Yes, she agreed. It is. And then, the smallest pause. But it hasn't been met. The words landed without force. They didn't need it. What does that mean? The chairman demanded. She closed the folder halfway. Not fully, not yet. It means, she said, the acquisition assumes continuity, where none currently exists. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. The CFO's eyes moved quickly now, connecting pieces, recalculating risk, reconstructing a model that had just lost a variable. Clarify the discontinuity, he said. She met his gaze. Steady. Direct. Effective this morning, she said. The designated oversight authority withdrew. No one spoke, because everyone understood the implication at the same time. Withdrew, not delayed, not unavailable, gone. The chairman's expression hardened. That authority can be reassigned. No, she said. Just that, no explanation, no elaboration, just a boundary. And for the first time, the room didn't push back immediately, because something in her tone suggested this wasn't a negotiation. It was a conclusion. The CFO stood up slightly, not fully leaving his seat, but enough to signal escalation. Who held that authority? He asked. He already suspected, but precision demanded confirmation. She looked around the room, at the faces that had dismissed her, at the voices that had moved forward without checking, at the system that had assumed she was irrelevant, then back at him. I did. No emphasis, no drama, just fact. The kind of fact that rearranges everything after it's spoken. A chair creaked somewhere to the left. Someone inhaled sharply. The VP went completely still, and the chairman, for the first time, said nothing. Because in a deal worth $2.1 billion, the only signature that mattered had just declined to exist. And by the time they realized it, she had already stepped outside the system they thought they controlled. If you've ever watched a room full of confidence collapse over one missing detail, you know how fast power shifts. Subscribe now, because the next chapter doesn't just reveal what she did next. It shows what happens when a $2.1 billion deal tries to move forward without the one person it can't replace. And trust this, they still think they can fix it. They can't. The silence didn't break. It recalculated. 20 executives, each trained to respond, to fill space, to assert control, suddenly found themselves doing the one thing none of them were comfortable with. Waiting. The chairman leaned back slowly, as if distance might restore perspective. It didn't. The room had already shifted into a configuration no one had rehearsed. "You held oversight authority," he said finally, tone sharpened into something colder, more surgical. "And you chose to withdraw it this morning. Not a question, a reconstruction." She closed the folder fully now. Not abrupt, not symbolic, just finished. Yes, one word. Complete. The CFO didn't sit back down. He remained slightly forward, elbows near the table, eyes fixed, not on her, not on the chairman, but on the invisible architecture of the deal now collapsing in his mind. "Timeline," he said. Again, precision. She didn't hesitate. 7:42 a.m. Exact, predictable, intentional. A few heads turned instinctively toward their devices, as if the timestamp might argue back. It didn't. Because systems record. They don't interpret. The chairman exhaled through his nose, a quiet, controlled release of pressure. "And you didn't consider informing the board prior to this meeting?" There it was. Not outrage. Accountability framing. She met his gaze evenly. The board was informed. A pause, subtle, sharp. "You were not." The distinction landed clean. Someone at the far end of the table shifted, the soft scrape of chair legs against polished floor echoing louder than it should have. The chairman's fingers tapped once against the table. Not nervous, measured. A signal to himself more than anyone else. "Then let's correct the communication gap," he said. "Reinstate the authority. We proceed." Again, proceed. He was still speaking the language of momentum. She was operating in conclusions. "That's not possible," she said. No emphasis, no resistance, just a closed door. "Everything is possible with alignment," he replied, leaning forward now. "If this is a matter of terms, we can renegotiate." A few executives nodded reflexively. Of course they could renegotiate. That's what rooms like this were built for. Adjustment, pressure, incentive, control. She watched them, not dismissively, not critically, just accurately. "This isn't a matter of terms," she said. "Then what is it?" the VP demanded, voice cracking just enough to betray the strain underneath. She held his gaze for a fraction of a second. Long enough. "It's a matter of conditions already defined," she said. The CFO's hand moved again, back to the tablet, scrolling, isolating clauses, tracing dependencies like fault lines. Clause 11.4 requires continuous oversight authority from pre-signing through post-acquisition integration, he said, half to himself, half to the room. Withdrawal voids execution eligibility. There it was. Not her voice. His. Verification. The chairman's jaw tightened. Authority can be reassigned. The CFO shook his head once. Small, final. Not under this structure. A ripple moved through the executives. Quieter this time, more internal. Calculations, reassessments. Risk models rewriting themselves in real time. "Explain," the chairman said, sharper now. The CFO turned the screen outward, not to show, but to anchor his explanation. "The authority isn't just a role," he said. "It's a designated signatory bound to operational continuity metrics tied to pre-acquisition performance." He glanced briefly at her, then back. "In simple terms," he added, "the system doesn't recognize a replacement." Silence. Not confusion. Understanding. Late, but precise. The chairman leaned forward, both hands now flat against the table. "Then we create a workaround," he said. She shook her head. "Once. Minimal. There isn't one." The VP's composure cracked. That's impossible. Deals this size don't hinge on one individual. She didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to, because the CFO already had. They do, he said quietly, when the structure is built that way. A pause, longer this time. He looked directly at the chairman. This one is. No one spoke, because the implication was no longer theoretical. It was operational. The chairman's voice lowered, losing none of its authority, but shifting into something more focused. Why withdraw? He asked. Not accusation, not yet. Cause. She considered the question, not as if searching for an answer, but as if deciding how much of it the room was capable of understanding. Because the conditions for continuity were no longer met, she said. Controlled. Complete. The CFO's eyes narrowed slightly. Define the break, he said. Another precise request. She met it. At 7:12 a.m., she said, the operational structure assumed in this agreement ceased to exist. A few executives exchanged looks. The VP spoke first, urgency bleeding into his tone. That's not reflected in any report. It wouldn't be, she said. Why not? Because reports follow events. They don't prevent them. She let the silence stretch just long enough. Because the change occurred at the governance level, she said. The chairman's gaze sharpened. Be specific. She held it. Didn't look away. Your decision, she said, to remove independent oversight from the integration phase. A stillness spread, not from confusion this time, but from recognition. A decision made earlier, quick, strategic, confident, and now visible. The chairman's expression didn't break, but something behind it adjusted. That was a structural optimization, he said. It was a structural assumption, she corrected. Another pause, short, precise. And it invalidated the condition required for my authority to remain in effect. The CFO leaned back slightly now, finally sitting again. Not relaxed, resolved. The model had closed. The outcome had settled. This isn't a delay, he said quietly. It's a termination of eligibility. No one argued, because no one could. The chairman's fingers tightened against the table, then released. Control reapplied. If the condition is restored, he said, does the authority return? A question now, not a command. She looked at him, studied, measured. No, she said, flat, final. Why? He pressed. Because something once broken doesn't always reset. Because continuity, once interrupted, becomes history, not status. She answered without metaphor. Because the withdrawal has already been executed and recorded, she said. The system recognizes it as final. The CFO nodded once. Confirmation. The room didn't react outwardly, but internally, everything had shifted from how to proceed to how to explain what just happened. She stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just finished. The chair moved back with a soft, controlled sound. 20 pairs of eyes followed her. Not with dismissal now, not with curiosity, but with the quiet intensity reserved for irreversible moments. She placed the folder on the table, centered, aligned, closed. You built a structure that required continuity, she said calmly, then removed the only element that ensured it. No accusation, just architecture. And now, she added, the structure behaves exactly as designed. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to challenge, only consequences to process. She turned toward the door. No rush, no hesitation, just movement, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Her hand reached the handle, paused, for a fraction of a second. Not for them, for precision. Then, she opened it and stepped out. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the room, no one moved. Not immediately. Because for the first time since the meeting began, there was no next slide, no next step, no one left to sign. And outside that room, the only person who could restore the deal had already chosen not to. The door closed without sound. And that was the problem. Because silence in a room like this was never neutral. It was diagnostic. It exposed what confidence usually concealed. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because every option now had a cost attached to it. The chairman was the first to shift. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't show frustration. That wasn't his style. Control, for him, wasn't volume. It was direction. "Lock the room," he said. 2 words. Immediate compliance. The assistant near the wall hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to register that this wasn't routine, then nodded and moved to secure the door. A quiet click. Containment. The CFO didn't look up. He was already reconstructing the timeline. 7:12, governance shift, he murmured. 7:42, authority withdrawal. 30 minutes. That was all it took. 30 minutes to turn a $2.1 billion acquisition into an ineligible transaction. One of the executives exhaled sharply. "We can still salvage this. We just need to reestablish the condition." "No," the CFO said. Not loud, not aggressive, just exact. "We can't reestablish continuity after interruption," he continued. "By definition, it's already broken." Another executive leaned forward. "Then we redefine continuity. Legal can restructure the clause." "Not post-withdrawal," the CFO replied. "The clause governs pre-execution conditions. You don't rewrite entry requirements after failing them." The distinction landed heavily, because it wasn't about negotiation anymore. It was about sequence. And they were late. The chairman's gaze moved slowly across the table, assessing, not people, but positions. "Legal," he said. A woman 3 seats down straightened immediately. "We can attempt a corrective amendment," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But it would require unanimous reauthorization from all stakeholders." "How long?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, because she knew the real variable. Not time. Her. "At minimum several days," she said, assuming cooperation. Assuming. The word echoed quietly through the room. The VP ran a hand through his hair, composure slipping. "We don't have days. The market will react. Competitors will move." "They already are," someone muttered. No one disagreed. The CFO finally looked up. "We're exposed," he said. Again, no emotion, just status. "Explain," the chairman said. "The acquisition was priced based on immediate execution," the CFO said. "Capital allocation, hedging positions, preliminary disclosures. Everything assumed closure today." He paused, measured. "Without execution, those positions remain open. Open, not incomplete, not delayed, vulnerable." A few executives shifted uncomfortably now. This wasn't structural anymore. This was financial, real, immediate. "How exposed?" the chairman asked. The CFO didn't soften it. "Worst case?" he said. 8 to 9 figures. Silence. He didn't need to say more. Because everyone in the room understood what that meant. Not just loss, visibility. The kind that attracts questions. The chairman's fingers tapped once against the table again. Slower this time. Controlled. "We contain it," he said. "How?" the VP asked, sharper than intended. The chairman didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, he didn't have a clean line forward. The CFO filled the gap. "We need her." Direct. Unavoidable. A few heads turned again, toward the door now, as if it might open on its own. "She's already withdrawn," the legal counsel said. "Reinstatement isn't automatic." "Nothing about this is automatic anymore," the CFO replied. The chairman leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. "What does she want?" he asked. No one answered because no one had asked. The assumption had always been compliance, availability, presence. The CFO exhaled slowly. "That's the wrong question," he said. The chairman's gaze shifted to him. "Then ask the right one." The CFO held it. "What did we remove that made her leave?" A pause, longer now, because the answer wasn't hidden. It had already been said. 7:12 a.m. governance shift. The chairman didn't look away, but something in his posture adjusted, slightly, almost imperceptibly. "We optimize the structure," he said. The CFO didn't argue. He just reframed. "We removed independence from oversight," he said, "in a deal that explicitly required it." No one spoke, because that wasn't interpretation, that was alignment. The VP leaned back slowly, realization settling in layers. "So the condition wasn't procedural," he said quietly. "No," the CFO replied. "It was structural?" "Yes." Another silence. Different this time, less chaotic, more settled. Because the problem had finally taken shape, and shape meant limitation. The chairman stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift gravity back toward himself. "Prepare an outreach," he said. "To her?" the VP asked. "To the only variable that matters," the chairman replied. Precision again. The CFO nodded once, but his expression didn't change, because he already knew. Outreach wasn't leverage, not anymore. "She doesn't need to respond," he said. The chairman looked at him. Sharp. Focused. "No," he agreed. "But she will." Confidence reapplied, reconstructed, the kind that assumes influence still exists. Across the room, the legal counsel closed her laptop slowly. "We should be careful with assumptions," she said. A rare interruption. The chairman didn't respond immediately, because even he could feel it now. The shift wasn't temporary. It was positional. "She already acted," she continued, "without signaling, without negotiation." A pause, then. "That suggests intent," the CFO added quietly. "And independence." 2 words, more dangerous than any number on the screen. The chairman's gaze moved once more toward the door, closed, unresponsive. For the first time since the meeting began, it wasn't just a barrier, it was a boundary. And on the other side of it, the only person who could reopen a $2.1 billion deal had already demonstrated she didn't need anything from this room, which meant the next move was no longer theirs to control. No one announced the end of the meeting, because technically it hadn't ended. It had stalled in a place where decisions no longer moved outcomes. The chairman remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, then reached for his phone. Not rushed, not uncertain, just deliberate. "If she's still in the building, bring her back," he said quietly. The assistant nodded and stepped out, the door opening and closing with that same controlled silence that now felt louder than any argument. Inside, the room didn't reset. It recalibrated. The CFO was already running parallel scenarios: containment strategies, disclosure timing, damage thresholds. Numbers shifted on his screen, none of them landing where they were supposed to. "Market opens in under 2 hours," he said without looking up. "If this isn't resolved, we need a narrative." "Not yet," the chairman replied. A pause, then, more precisely, "Not until we know whether resolution is possible." The CFO didn't argue, because that, too, was accurate. Across the table, the legal counsel closed the last of her tabs. "If she declines," she said, "we transition from execution failure to governance failure." The phrasing was clean. The implication wasn't. "Investors won't care about the distinction," the VP muttered. "No," she agreed, "but regulators will." That landed differently, because regulators didn't respond to narratives. They responded to records, and records in this case were already written. 7:12 a.m., governance shift. 7:42 a.m., authority withdrawal. Sequence, irreversible. The chairman finally sat down again, hands folded, gaze steady. "Then we don't position this as failure," he said. "We position it as delay." The CFO looked up this time. "That depends on her." Always back to her. A system reduced to a single variable. The assistant returned, empty-handed, a detail no one missed. "She's gone," he said. Not uncertain. Confirmed. "When?" the chairman asked. 7 minutes ago." 7 minutes, that was all. 7 minutes to move from presence to absence, from variable to constant. The CFO exhaled slowly. "Timing aligns," he said. Of course it did. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. "Where did she go?" the VP asked. The assistant hesitated. "No destination logged." Another absence. Another clean cut in the system. The chairman's expression didn't change, but something behind it tightened. "Contact her," he said. "We're trying," the assistant replied. No response. No response. The phrase carried more weight than refusal. Refusal implied engagement. This was disengagement. The legal counsel spoke again, quieter now. If she intended to negotiate, she would have stayed. No one disagreed, because everyone understood the difference between leverage and exit. The chairman leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Then she expects us to come to her," he said. The CFO didn't answer immediately. He closed his tablet. Finally. Not because he was finished, but because the model no longer needed updating. "It's not expectation," he said. The chairman looked at him. "Then what is it?" The CFO held his gaze. "It's indifference." A word that changed the scale of the problem, because negotiation requires need, and indifference removes it. Silence settled again. Not tense, not chaotic, just clear. The VP spoke, slower now. "So what do we actually have left?" A good question, late but accurate. The CFO answered. "Exposure," he said. "Records," he added. "And one unclosed transaction." He paused. Then, precisely. "Everything else depends on her choice." The chairman's fingers tapped once more against the table, then stopped. Control didn't disappear. It adapted. "Prepare both paths," he said. "Resolution and disclosure." The legal counsel nodded. Understood. The assistant moved quickly now, already drafting, already coordinating. The machine was still functioning, just without direction. The chairman stood again. This time, no one mistook it for anything but conclusion. "Until we have an answer," he said. We assume nothing. A glance toward the door, then back to the room. And we react faster than we did this morning. A quiet acknowledgement, not of error, but of delay. The CFO picked up his tablet again, but didn't turn it on. No need. He already knew the only variable left. He said it anyway. Find her. Not a suggestion, not a request, a requirement. Because in a system built on control, projections, and certainty, they had just discovered something none of them had modeled. That the most critical point of failure is the one that doesn't try to win, doesn't argue, doesn't negotiate, just leaves. And by the time you understand it, it's no longer part of your system. The room emptied slowly after that. No urgency, no noise, just quiet, measured exits, each one carrying a version of the same realization. The deal hadn't failed loudly. It had failed precisely. And somewhere beyond the reach of that room, the only signature that could restore it was no longer waiting to be asked. Silence.